You know, sometimes a song comes on and instantly you're back in that moment. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
music has this incredible power to tap into these shared human experiences, right?
Wow.
But it kind of got me thinking, like, what happens when those experiences, those stories, aren't reflected in the music we hear? And that's what we're diving into today, this whole idea of representation in music, or maybe more importantly, the lack of it.
It's true.
Specifically, we're going to be focusing on the experiences of transgender and intersex artists in the music industry.
Yeah, it's a conversation that's, well, overdue, I think.
Yeah.
And to help us unpack all of this, we're turning to an article from TATANKA, which, if you're into music and activism, you've probably come across their stuff.
Oh, absolutely. They always have their finger on the pulse.
Right. Plus, they're doing some really interesting work with AI and music, which we'll definitely circle back to later. But for now, let's really break down this issue of representation because it goes way beyond just, who gets signed to a major label.
Right. It's deeper than that.
It really is about looking at the music industry as this kind of mirror reflecting society at large. And sadly, a lot of the same historical prejudices, the systemic barriers that exist out in the world, they kind of seep into the music scene too.
Exactly. And the article really dives into that, this historical context of discrimination in the arts, especially within music, and how that's created this ripple effect that we're still grappling with today.
It's like this cycle, right?
Hmm.
For decades, there was this very particular image, this sound that the music industry just gravitated towards.
Yeah.
And that narrow focus inevitably left a lot of communities on the sidelines. And transgender and intersex artists were definitely among them.
And it's that history of exclusion that makes it even harder for artists today to break through those barriers, right?
Exactly. It's like they're facing an even steeper climb because of who they are.
And speaking of barriers, the article highlights 4 main challenges that transgender and intersex artists often come up against.
Okay, let's hear them.
We've got stereotyping, lack of mentorship, financial struggles, and of course, limited visibility. I mean, imagine you pour your heart and soul into your music, but the second you try to share it, you're already being judged, pigeonholed.
It's got to be so disheartening. Instead of being celebrated for their talent, for their unique voices, they're having to constantly battle these preconceived notions about what their music should sound like.
It's like, just because someone identifies a certain way, it doesn't mean they're limited to one style of music.
Exactly. Your identity doesn't dictate your artistic expression.
And if you don't have that basic understanding, that acceptance, it can make it really tough to find your footing, especially in an industry that's all about who you know, who's got your back.
And that's that second hurdle, right? Lack of mentorship and support. You know, the music industry thrives on connections, on people who believe in you.
Right, having those mentors.
Exactly. But if you're constantly facing discrimination, it can feel impossible to find mentors, producers, or even other artists who get where you're coming from, who can relate to your journey.
And that feeling of isolation must be really tough.
It is, and it often makes those financial challenges even worse. Because think about it, limited gigs, difficulty getting funding for your music, maybe even the cost of medical transitions if that's part of their journey,
Mm-hmm.
it all adds up.
It's like this vicious cycle, right? If you can't afford to create, to promote your work, how can you get your music out there?
Exactly, and that takes us to that final challenge, limited visibility. Without access to those big platforms, the support of major labels, it becomes even harder for transgender and intersex artists to get their music heard by a wider audience.
It's like this interconnected web of challenges, but I think it's important to ask, why should someone who doesn't identify as trans or intersex care about this?
That's the big question, right?
Like, why does this lack of representation matter to all of us?
Because representation in music, it isn't just about the artists themselves. It's about the message it sends to every single person listening. Imagine you're a young person, maybe you're questioning your own identity, feeling alone.
Yeah.
And then you see someone like you on stage, living authentically, sharing their gift with the world.
It's that if they can do it, I can too kind of feeling, right?
Absolutely. It's so powerful.
Yeah.
And on a larger scale, that visibility helps challenge those harmful stereotypes we were talking about. It dismantles prejudices, and it creates a more inclusive world for everyone.
It's about recognizing that we're all different.
Yes, and music has this amazing power to do that.
And speaking of challenging norms, this article from TATANKA really stood out to me because they're doing some pretty groundbreaking work with AI and music, which honestly blew my mind. And it connects perfectly with this whole conversation about breaking down barriers and pushing boundaries. They actually highlight 3 key reasons why representation in music is so important. challenging stereotypes, inspiring younger generations, and promoting inclusivity.
All fantastic points. And I think challenging stereotypes is so crucial because when we see transgender and intersex artists succeeding, it forces us to confront our own biases, you know? It makes us question those narrow boxes we try to put people in.
Because talent has nothing to do with your gender identity, right?
That's right. And when we see that play out in a field as influential as music, it starts to chip away at those harmful stereotypes.
It's like saying, hey, we're here, we're talented, our stories deserve to be told just as much as anyone else's. And by sharing those stories, we can inspire those younger generations coming up.
Exactly. Because visibility shows them, especially young people who identify as transgender or intersex, that they can dream big, they could pursue their passions, even in spaces where they might not have always felt welcome.
It's about showing them that they belong.
100%.
Mm.
And that kind of empowerment, that sense of belonging, it ripples outwards, creating a more inclusive society for everyone.
Because when we celebrate our differences, when we make space for everyone, we all benefit.
Absolutely. Music has this incredible potential to reflect the full spectrum of who we are, but only if we allow it to.
Now, you mentioned TATANKA's work with AI and music earlier. I have to admit, I'm a bit obsessed with this whole concept.
It's fascinating, right? Their digital ecoplex project.
Yes. Like, they're not just talking about representation, they're out there actually taking action.
And they've been doing it for a while. Did you know they were exploring these concepts back in 1985?
1985? Get out of here. AI music back then.
It's true. They're way ahead of the game.
Yeah.
It just shows how forward-thinking they've always been.
No, for real. Totally adding that to my list of things to check out. We've covered a lot here. The history, the challenges, why representation matters. But I think this goes beyond just understanding the problem, right? It's about figuring out, okay, well, where do we go from here? How do we actually make a difference?
You hit the nail on the head. It's not enough to just talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And while this article doesn't exactly give us a step-by-step guide, a magic solution.
Right, because there probably isn't one, really.
Exactly. But it does get the wheels turning. It sparks ideas.
Okay, so let's dive into some of those ideas. What from the article really resonated with you, really made you think?
One thing that really struck me was this idea that music, it's like this mirror to our values as a society. Like, if we only celebrate a narrow range of voices, what does that say about us?
Oh, that's deep.
Right. It's like we're looking at a rainbow, but only paying attention to one or two colors. We're missing out on the full spectrum of beauty and complexity.
I like that analogy. And it makes me think maybe part of this is about expanding our definition of what even counts as good music.
Totally. Who gets to decide that anyway?
Yeah.
Whose voices do we value? Who gets to tell their stories? And that's where we, as listeners, come in.
Wait, are you saying we have power here, not just the big industry execs?
Absolutely. Think about it. Every time we stream a song, go to a concert, even share an artist we love with a friend,
Right.
we're casting a vote. We're saying, this is the kind of music I want to support.
So it's like being more mindful, more aware of who we're listening to.
Exactly. And actively seeking out artists from diverse backgrounds, maybe stepping outside our usual genres.
I can get down with that, but I gotta be honest, there are probably a lot of people listening right now thinking, hold on, I just listen to what I like. I don't care who made it or what their identity is.
And I get that. We all have our preferences. But maybe it's less about overhauling your entire playlist overnight and more about asking yourself, what am I missing out on?
Right, like what other voices are out there just waiting to be heard?
Exactly. Think of it like an adventure. You never know. You might discover your next favorite band, and you might even learn something new about yourself along the way.
I'm all about expanding my horizons. And isn't that one of the most amazing things about music? It has this power to open our hearts, our minds, if we let it.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Yeah.
Music is a universal language, right? It transcends borders and languages.
For real. But for it to be truly universal, it needs to reflect all of us, right? And that brings us back to TATANKA, because they're not just talking about this stuff. They're out there doing the work. And this whole thing with AI and music, I mean, it's like they're literally pushing boundaries.
Their digital ecoplex project is just mind-blowing, exploring AI's potential to create new sounds, new forms of music. And the fact that they were already on this back in 1985, it's incredible.
I know, 1985. Like, I wasn't even a thought back then. But it makes you wonder, what does the future hold for underrepresented artists?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
Wish I had a crystal ball.
But I do think platforms like TATANKA, they give me hope, you know? They're out there proving that change is possible.
It's inspiring.
It is. And that we can use technology, we can use art to really push for change, to create spaces where everyone feels welcome.
And it's not just on them, right? It's all of us, artists, listeners, everyone in between. We all have a role to play in challenging the status quo.
100%. And, thinking about their digital echoplex and how they were already using AI to make music back in the 80s.
Way back. It really gets you thinking, what other technological advancements are just around the corner, right? And how can we use those to create a more level playing field for artists who haven't always had the same opportunities?
Right. Like imagine if AI could help break down language barriers in music.
Oh, wow.
Or give artists with disabilities new ways to express themselves, to share their art with the world.
That's powerful.
So
it's like technology could actually help amplify voices that have been silenced for far too long.
Amplify, exactly, not replace.
So exactly. We're not talking about erasing human artists.
No way.
It's about using AI as a tool, for collaboration, for pushing creative boundaries.
Totally. It's about possibilities, not limitations.
Yes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this? What's the call to action?
It really comes back to that sense of curiosity and openness we were talking about earlier. Be willing to step outside your comfort zone, explore music that might feel unfamiliar at first.
I love that.
You might be surprised by what you find. And you might even discover your new favorite artist in the process, right?
Absolutely. So to everyone listening, take that curiosity, that openness, and let it guide you on your musical journey. Go explore, discover some amazing new artists. And remember, every time you hit play, you have the power to help shape the future of music. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you on the next one.